Welcome to another edition of Free Speech Central here on Unprecedented TV with me, Lembit Öpik, and
me, Joe Marney.
Good to have your company today, Joe and viewers. This is a show where we invite thought leaders in their fields to come and give the best account of themselves and their beliefs. In other words, we're not here to pull people down. We're here to give people a platform. That's the essence of free speech, and that's what we shall be doing. And in the process of doing so, we hope that you'll have the courage and the energy to make your judgment about people perhaps you haven't come across before, or you have been dubious about. The most important thing about what we're doing is that we try to converse in a way which makes sense, which helps our guest to expound their philosophy and their views, without us endlessly nagging them, trying to score points or anything else like that. Joe, today we're going to the left instead of the right. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I'm really excited for this one. We've taken a massive U-turn and we're going left. It's good. It's going to be good.
You say a massive U-turn. It's not exactly. It's kind of a 90-degree turn in a direction you don't normally go. Let's be honest.
I don't usually go to the left. No. I swerve to the right quite often. But this is going to be really interesting because we're open here to all different views and all different people, and we're the home of free speech. So, of course, everyone's welcome here. All views are welcome here, and it's an open discussion. It's going to be really good.
Right, let's see what we get then. Joining us today is a man I've known for many years and actually I've worked with as well. It's Chris Williamson, former Labour MP. Good to see you, Chris. Thanks for
good to be here. Good to
be
here.
How have you been?
Not too bad, not too bad. Enjoying the weather, which is quite unusual actually for the bank holiday to be nice and warm and a lovely sort of breeze, which we enjoyed. We went to Cork Abbey. We joined the National Trust earlier this year, and there's quite a lot of lovely National Trust sites in Derbyshire, and so we're taking advantage of it. And we went to Cork Abbey on Monday, Bank Holiday Monday, and it was absolutely beautiful. And they got a great little cafe restaurant there, and I had vegan bangers and mash. Couldn't be better, mate.
Vegan?
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, man and boy.
Very nice.
I'm actually a rather boring teetotal, non-smoking vegan.
Oh, wow. I'm a vegetarian, but my vice is the alcohol, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I never liked alcohol. I gave alcohol up when I was 17. I stopped smoking when I was 18, and I became a vegan when I was 19.
Wow, long time then.
So
I mean, you're 21 now, aren't you?
It was 1976. It was actually.
Yeah.
So you and Joe have that in common then. Okay, she's vegetarian, you're vegan. I'm a meat eater. You can gang up against me in that case. 17. So it does prove it's possible to survive without meat, you two.
Very much so, mate. Yeah, very much so. The vegans will inherit the earth.
I lose. And Joe at least is on neutral ground there, perhaps. Little bit of a background, just quickly before we go any further. Why are you a vegan?
I went vegan, to be honest with you, Lembit, because I didn't like cruelty to animals. Funnily enough, when I was a teenager, I mean, I never liked cruelty to animals. I was always opposed to it. But paradoxically, I got a temporary job in the summer holidays in the early 1970s in a butcher's. And I didn't expect to be asked to help in the abattoir. But anyway, I was. And I don't know if it was that lived with me, but certainly when I made the decision to go vegan, I sort of recalled some of the experiences that I witnessed in the abattoir, and the sheer terror on the faces of the animals was palpable, to be honest with you. But the thing that actually made me take the plunge, if I can put it like that, was Spike Milligan. Actually, he was on Michael Parkinson being interviewed, and he was talking about being a vegetarian and how you should have respect for life. And obviously Spike was a very smart cookie, and he was up against a French gourmet, and both he and Parky were sort of ridiculing him a little bit, and he absolutely destroyed their arguments. And I guess I've been thinking in terms of maybe giving up meat and dairy, etc. And I just after listening to Spike, I decided he's absolutely right, and so I just went from there. Really, yeah.
Well, I respect you for that.
Yeah, I think vegans are probably the most criticised group on the planet.
Well, it's become kind of trendy, hasn't it, now to be a vegan? I mean, I've been vegan in 1976. We were a bit of a trailblazer, and there wasn't very much in the way of, meat substitute. Not that I'm into meat substitute, to be honest with you, but there was, for example, the soy milk hadn't really even been invented as far as I could tell. And, even sort of routine products like, I don't know, bread and biscuits, etc., they were full of animal fat. So you had, became a bit neurotic, really, having to scrutinize everything that we bought. But it also made us, more self-reliant. I got involved with the animal rights movement, and so didn't feel particularly isolated because there were a lot of people who were also similarly minded, vegetarian and vegans. And I've been brought up in a working class household, and I guess when I first went vegan, I was basically eating two meat and it was the meat and two veg without the meat, as it were. So it was a very bland and boring diet. So it was great to be exposed to things like lentils, which I'd never even heard of, back in 1976, believe it or not. And I remember a friend of mine who was a bit more worldly wise, and we was going to make a salad, and he said, let's get some peppers. And I was thinking, oh, you're joking, are you? They're really hot, aren't they? I mean, I just was so naive about food. I think Brits in general we're fairly naive in relation to our cuisine, although I think things have absolutely moved on in every respect, really. I think people are much more wise now about their food choices, and certainly as far as being a vegan these days, it's a lot easier to make that transition than it used to be, because there are a lot more, as well as products, like oat milk and all the different things that you can get, the vegan margarine and all that sort of stuff, and animal products are not contained in all the sort of products that they used to be. So it makes it now, I think, so much easier to become a vegan, and you have, back in the day there was really hardly any recipe books around either. There was one by a woman called Eva Batt, What's Cooking, and it was very basic stuff. It's quite nice, but it's fairly basic stuff. But these days, it's amazing, isn't it, the amount of vegan choices that there are, and the wonderful vegan recipe books that are available now. And so yeah, it's a very varied and interesting and delicious diet to pursue, actually, Lembit. So I can highly recommend it to you, sir.
Go on, Joe. I know you want to have your tuppenny worth here. Don't talk about the politics. Go on.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, as an ethical vegan, I have to ask, what do you make of halal slaughter and kosher slaughter and the non-sun religious slaughters?
Yeah, I think I would sooner see no animals being killed, of course. But having worked in a slaughterhouse, I frankly don't really see that there's a huge amount of difference. I know that people, certainly my experience anyway, what I witnessed, when they are engaged in killing day after day, people become desensitized, become brutalized. And there was a lot of cruelty, actually, wanton cruelty, goading the animals, etc. And I think the difference, in a sense, between that and say halal is that there is a respect for the animal. I know they're killing it, and I wish they wouldn't, but then I think there's more of a respect.
But does the animal care about that? I don't think.
I think.
Care about.
Well, there's been various reports about whether the halal method of slaughter is more cruel, whether the animals feel more distress or not. It's a grisly business, killing, isn't it, at the end of the day, which-ever way you do it.
Yeah, but if we've got to do it, I think that it should be done in a way that welfare has to be put first, rather than religious views or...
Yeah, I take your point, but I think there are some people, as I say, that have looked at this perhaps in a bit more detail than I have, and it's a long time since I looked at this in any kind of detail, I've got to say, who would take the view that the welfare of the animals killed in a sort of halal situation is no different, maybe in some ways even better. But look, I would sooner people didn't eat flesh at all.
We're in agreement there. Yeah.
I don't think that we can say that we're on some moral higher ground because they use a captive bolt pistol to stun the animals or an electric current to, I think, pigs tend to use.
But it's a far quicker death, isn't it, than bleeding out for a number of minutes.
I have to admit, when I was a member of Parliament, I was in a rural constituency and I had to go to abattoirs quite often. And two of the things that I remember are, number one, going to an abattoir, standard one, and the animals knew what was going to happen. You could tell. They felt, and I was really, as a meat eater, it really caused me trouble. And I eat less meat now, and it's partly because it's an inconsistent point, I admit, Chris and Joe, but I just didn't feel comfortable about what I saw. I am conflicted by it. And the other thing, the worst thing I saw was a factory pig farm and a factory chicken farm, because I don't think we've got the right to do that to animals.
No, I mean, and there's also health implications and environmental implications, isn't there, as well, in terms of the pollution that's caused by factory farming, let alone the welfare considerations. And, you know, in order to keep animals healthy when they're kept in these incredibly unnatural environments, you know, they have to be pumped full of drugs, antibiotics, and so on and so forth. And, you know, I think there is this concern, isn't there, these days about people's resistance to antibiotics. And I suspect that to some extent, the use of antibiotics in the agricultural industry is partly responsible for that, as well as maybe an over prescribing by GPs and so on over the years. But yeah, it's an interesting area, and it's an area where often people get very, very defensive. I know whenever I've sort of spoken about on social media occasionally, you know, about veganism and so on, it's quite controversial. People get very defensive about their eating habits, you know, and when they're challenged about it, people, you know, find that very uncomfortable.
Well, the first third of the fifth of the show seems to have caused an unexpected alignment between you and Joe. We've got to go into the politics, though. Maybe the shifting tectonic plates of this conversation might alter the allegiances. Let's go back a little bit. You and I were both members of Parliament, and you joined Labour, and you were really, in my view, one of the very principled Labour politicians. Before we talk about why you left, why were you a Labour MP in the first place?
Well, I think it goes back to before becoming an MP, actually. I mean, I joined the Labour Party in 1976 as well, funnily enough, the year that I became a vegan. Because I felt the Labour Party was the best vehicle to deliver social justice and progressive social change. And, you know, I'm a product of that post-war generation, the baby boomers, and we benefited from the post-war consensus, where there was significant investment in public services, there was full employment, there was rising living standards. There was still a lot of injustice, however, in the world, and I just felt that the Labour Party was the best way of actually addressing some of the injustices that I witnessed. You know, even though things were considerably better, in my opinion, in the 1970s in many ways than they are today, there were lots of injustices. There was a lot of casual racism, for example. There was still inequality, although inequality was definitely narrowing. I mean, narrowing to the extent that in 1976, again, it's a very kind of significant year for me, because that's the year I was able to buy my first house. I was 19 years of age. I was working as an apprentice bricklayer, and I was able, with my girlfriend, we went on to become my wife, we were able to save up and buy a brand new 3-bedroomed semi-detached house backing onto a waterfront in a desirable village. Now, which was 8 miles south of Derby, where I was born. That's impossible in this day and age, actually. And so things have definitely gone backwards on a whole host of different metrics, housing being one of them. But yeah, I mean, I just sort of felt that Labour was the best vehicle available, really. And I guess I was influenced by my mum and dad. My dad nor my mum were members of a political party, but they voted Labour, and they you know, they had a sense of right and wrong. And my mum in particular, you know, was always used to stress that there's good and bad in everybody, and, you know, should always try and look for the good in people, which I do try to do. I find it difficult with some, and I find it impossible actually with Zionists. But anyway, that's another story. And also at that time, I think that which also influenced me, because I mean, I'm not an academic person, didn't go to university, left school at 15. I played truant actually most of the last year, if I'm honest with you. I got dropped from the school team because I didn't turn up enough to school. So if you can't turn up to school, you can't play in the school team. But so since my education was from my experiences, from my parents, but also I think from the drama. There was a lot of very political drama, I think, on the TV back then. And Ken Loach was in his pomp. And I remember watching things like Days of Hope, which talked about, well, it went from towards the end of the First World War and talking about conscientious objectors through to the general strike and the betrayal really of the workers, of the working class by the TUC, the Trade Union Congress, and actually the Labour Party as well.
That was quite a speech you made.
Thank you.
You seem such a quiet person off the platform, but up there, the sparks are really flying.
Must be my Methodist training.
You spoke about legislating capitalism out of existence.
In this country, that's possible, yes.
Within the institutional framework.
Yes, because see, we have a highly developed, civilized society based upon the rule of law where human rights and democracy are allowed to flourish.
So, if a Labour government planned to introduce really full-blooded socialist policies like the nationalisation of land, factories, banks, insurance, docks, the whole lot, everything, then you really think that the ruling class is going to sit back and allow itself to be liquidated?
Well, it's a very hypothetical question.
No, but just supposing that it happened.
Well, of course, we'd expect certain resistance from varying sections of the employing classes. The big boys, with their economic power, would try to discredit us with propaganda in the newspapers, etc. Naturally, the Tories and the Liberals would do everything in their power to block it by legislative means in Parliament. But as I say, it's a very conjectural proposition. We don't have that kind of support yet.
But it was things like that kind of, I suppose, gave me a kind of political education. And as I say, I felt that the Labour Party was the best vehicle to try and bring about the changes that I wanted to see.
And you got elected to Parliament in what year?
First elected in 2010, lost then in 2015 by just 41 votes after 3 recounts, and then got re-elected in 2017. And then because of all the nonsense that we encountered with the Zionist lobby and the ghastly right-wingers in the Parliamentary Labour Party, and indeed beyond the Parliamentary Labour Party, who worked overtime to sabotage Jeremy's leadership of the party, and the best chance I think we've ever had really of bringing about fundamental change was lost. But yeah, prior to getting elected to Parliament, though, I was a councillor for about 20 years. I was a leader of the council, and in many ways that was my most rewarding period as a politician, when I was leader of the council. You're a big fish in a little pond, but you're also able to, bring about change. Okay, it was in my own city, which I'm very fond of. It's where I grew up, as it were. In fact, I only live 100 yards from where I was born. And so to be able to affect change in my own city, was incredibly rewarding, and having that executive power to do that, notwithstanding the massive cutbacks that there's been and changes in legislation, which has certainly hamstrung local government in terms of what it's able to do compared to what it used to be able to do. But we were still, I think, bringing about or trying to adhere to the principles of municipal socialism. And we've got a good tradition in Derbyshire of municipal socialism. The Claycross rent rebels back in the early 1970s, who resisted the Tory housing legislation. They were trying to force up the price of council rents, and they resisted that. Eventually got surcharged and barred from office, and a new group of people were elected, and they similarly refused to implement this Tory legislation, and they were also surcharged, bankrupted, and forced out of office. So we have that tradition, that radical tradition, and looking at what, for example, what was then a urban district council before local government reorganisation in 1974, wasn't just the resisting the Tory legislation in relation to housing, council housing. They were doing some incredibly novel things. I mean, for example, long before New Labour came into office under Blair, and one of the few good things New Labour did in terms of bringing about free TV licenses for pensioners. Claycross Council were doing that for their pensioners back in the late 1960s. They found a way also of ensuring that when Margaret Thatcher took away the milk for the kids, they found a novel way of continuing to do that. And
Margaret Thatcher, milk snatcher.
That's absolutely right, yeah.
The trouble is the people that make these pieces of legislation don't have to suffer from them, so they don't really realise the harm that it can do to our children. I mean, their children, it doesn't affect.
How important is it that your children have milk at school?
Well, it's really essential because I can't afford to give them the milk at home, and if they didn't get it at school, then they just wouldn't have it at all, and their health would lack, very badly.
We'll bridge them over until they have their dinner. You do know they've got something, in them until dinner time. And
when I was leader of the council in Derby, we tried to emulate that, and we were providing free social care, for example. We were doing some really, I think, if I say so myself, some really empowering novel stuff where we were devolving budgets to local communities and empowering people to have a greater say over where the council should spend its money in their neighbourhood. And we were bringing in other public service agencies and making them accountable to local people in a meaningful way. And, regrettably, because of the vagaries of the political cycle and the unpopularity of the Labour Party and Gordon Brown's disastrous premiership, we ended up, reaping the whirlwind and we lost control of the council. But that period where I was leader of the council was incredibly rewarding, and probably the most rewarding period of my time, as it were, as an elected member. It came close when I was elected as a member of Parliament the second time, because I was very big supporter of the agenda that Jeremy Corbyn was pursuing. And in many ways, I was wanting to go further on the economy, on a number of things, and certainly in terms of democratising the Labour Party. And I felt that we were on the cusp of really something great. I mean, I often describe it as we climbed to the top of the mountain and we glimpsed the promised land, but then we got dragged back down the mountainside again, and we were denied it. But we could have brought about that irreversible shift in the balance of wealth and power for working people and their families that Labour promised to do in the 1974 manifesto. I know I'm sort of talking a slight kind of ancient history, but that was a significant commitment, led by the likes of Tony Benn and so on. And they were implementing an alternative economic strategy. They were bringing about this irreversible shift. But then Wilson stepped down as leader, was replaced by Jim Callaghan. Dennis Healey, who'd been the Chancellor for that period under Wilson as well, he was a right-winger and obviously didn't understand how the monetary system operated. And in 1976, he went to the International Monetary Fund on a false premise and borrowed, I think it was $3.9 billion, and was never drawn down, was never needed to be drawn down. Britain's been a floating fiat currency since 1971 after Nixon jettisoned the Bretton Woods Agreement. There was absolutely no need. And Healey subsequently acknowledged that he was mistaken. He was wrong to do that. He was badly advised by his Treasury officials. But he admitted he was wrong for the wrong reasons, actually. But nevertheless, he admitted that he did get it wrong. But that set in train the election of Margaret Thatcher, because in exchange, as always happens with the International Monetary Fund, they insist on austerity measures, privatisation. And that led to the so-called winter of discontent, the industrial disputes, etc.
There are empty beds up on Bland Sutton Ward because the hospital stopped all but emergency admissions last Thursday. The Middlesex has managed for one day with, for example, nurses instead of porters pushing the patients about. But they couldn't carry on like this for very long. And as the strikers left to go to their rally, the managers inside said their biggest fear was further industrial action.
That was the first monetarist government, the first neoliberal government. That was then turbocharged by Thatcher, and the rest is history.
So, all right. So a whole lot there. I know Joe's going to want to come in. Red rag to blue bull when you talk about Margaret Thatcher. Joe, I'll let you say something about that. The interesting thing about the winter of discontent, that phrase, of course, very successfully robbed and misquoted in a way
Yes.
by the Conservatives about Labour.
And the media.
And the media. Many of our viewers may not remember all of that, but in short, I remember it because I was interested in politics. But it was a fascinating time, very turbulent time. We saw Jeremy Corbyn in one of the pictures while you were talking. We'll come back to him in a minute. But Joe, I know you're straining at the leash to take Chris on, your witness.
Oh no, I don't think we're ever going to agree on some things, Chris, and that's fine. But what I really wanted to ask you was about. I know you were very against the internal inquiry Labour had about anti-Semitism in the party. I think at the time you said something like it was a proxy war and BS, to use your words. Do you still stand by that?
Absolutely stand by to an even greater extent, actually. I mean, I was, I think, in some ways, mealy-mouthed about it, and I thought maybe there was some credibility to what was being suggested, even though I'd never ever witnessed it. But it was clearly an op. It was bad faith actors who were looking to use it to sabotage Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. Jeremy became a very, very popular person in the country. The Labour Party became the biggest party in Western Europe. There was massive support for the agenda that he was putting forward. Maybe not necessarily massive support right across the country for Jeremy himself, but when you actually broke down the individual policy proposals that he was putting forward, it's basic common sense, and I was referring to it as, as common sense socialism, bringing the utilities, for example, back into public ownership, stopping virtually all of them, I think, foreign-owned privateers from ripping off the British public, water, gas, electricity, and so on. It was scrapping tuition fees, building houses, kicking the privateers out of the public sector, particularly the National Health Service. I mean, the public sector has been turned into a cash cow for spivs, for privateers, and it hasn't improved the quality of service. The service has gone down, the prices have gone up, the workers who work in those industries are not as well remunerated as they would be and used to be, comparatively speaking. And so, I felt that was something that was definitely worth fighting for. And the anti-Semitism scam was used to derail Jeremy Corbyn. And, Jeremy gave it legs because when he was accused, for example, of being a Czech spy, of being a misogynist, all this complete nonsense that was thrown at him, he was able to bat it off. But as a dedicated anti-racist as he'd been all his life, it really hurt him, actually, to be accused of being an anti-Semite. And he took these characters at face value, and he kept apologizing and giving concessions. And I said to Jeremy, for God's sake, Jeremy, stop apologizing, stop giving ground. Because every time you apologize and give ground to Zionists, all you're doing is feeding the beast. And ultimately, what they're going to do is they're going to smash this.
What do you mean, Chris, when you say Zionist?
Well, Jewish supremacists, people who believe that they have a God-given right to stolen land in Palestine. Well, I mean, not all Jews, of course, are Zionists, let's be clear. And not all Zionists are, there's many, for example, Christian Zionists and so on. But yeah, I mean, Jewish supremacists are a plague, frankly. And, we see this. They are engaged in a genocide in Gaza right now, and of course what they're doing in the West Bank as well is appalling. But this isn't a new phenomenon. This goes back to 1948. Indeed, it goes back even further than that. But 1948, where prior to that it was the British Mandate after the Ottoman Empire was carved up after the First World War, and Britain was given responsibility for given the mandate by the League of Nations.
Arab states went to war with the Israelis after this. This is a big moment. 4 p.m., Rothschild Boulevard, David Ben-Gurion officially declaring Israel an independent state. The Jews finally have a home.
I assume then that you think that Israel shouldn't exist at all.
No, it should never have been established, and it certainly should not exist. Israel needs to be completely demolished, completely dismantled, and replaced with a unitary state where there is equal rights for all citizens, and there should be reparations paid to the Palestinians who've been so badly wronged removed from their homes and land in 1948. And actually, the way in which
was it their land? I mean, the Jewish people are from the same land, aren't they? So
no, they're not. I mean, that's nonsense. Judaism is a religion. It's not a race. And most of the people who are living, or certainly a large proportion, may not be a majority, but I think it's certainly very close to a majority, are not Semites. I mean, we talk about anti-Semitism. They're from Eastern Europe, for crying out loud. And
do you think they should go back to Europe?
Well, many of them hold dual citizenship, and I think there's a day of reckoning coming for the Zionist entity, and these people should face war crimes at tribunal. But just to go back to the point, there should be a unitary state, where the Palestinians and Christians and everybody can and the Jewish people can live side by side. However, there has to be reparations paid to the Palestinians for the injury that they've incurred. They obviously have to have a right of return. There'll be a de-Zionization process as well, because the Israeli population, the Jewish population in Israel now, have been completely radicalized. I mean, these people are beyond the pale. You look at the settlers, the extremism is off the scale.
Hamas, not extreme then.
Well, Hamas you talk about, but it's not just Hamas. It's Hamas, it's Islamic Jihad, it's the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. It's all of the resistance factions. It's wrong to just focus on Hamas. But they have an absolute right in international law to resist the occupier. And indeed, it's been specified by the United Nations that they have an absolute right to armed resistance. The Israelis have no right in international law for the activities that they're engaged in.
Terrorism is not resistance. Terrorism is just.
No. Look, the terrorists are the Zionists. The terrorists are the Israeli regime. The terrorists are the vast majority of the Israeli population, not the Palestinian people. They have an absolute right to resist their occupation. And that's what we should be focused on.
Are terrorists,
wait a minute.
They've been designated as terrorists by politicians. That doesn't make them terrorists.
So on the 7th of October, that wasn't an act of terror.
What wasn't? Sorry?
The 7th of October wasn't an act of terror. Is that what you're saying?
Talk about the 7th of October. Let's talk about the 7th of October for a moment then. Why did people break through that fence? Why did the Palestinian resistance fighters break through that fence? Because they wanted to take captives, because they wanted to use that as a bargaining chip to get released the thousands of Palestinian hostages that have been taken by the Israelis and thrown into literal dungeons where they are tortured.
By killing 1,000 people at a festival.
Hang on, Joe. Some of them literally raped to death. Thousands of Palestinians, including hundreds of children, in what they call administrative detention. This is this absolute scandal. They are the terrorists, not the resistance fighters. And just because some politicians have designated them terrorists doesn't make them terrorists. I mean, Yvette Cooper's designated a direct action, a peaceful direct action organization called Palestine Action. She's designated them as terrorists. And she's designated old age pensioners and priests and others in their 80s and 90s as terrorists. They're being arrested and charged with terrorism, for crying out loud, for saying that they oppose genocide and support Palestine Action. The whole thing is nonsense, and they're bringing the law into disrepute. This Labour government is bringing the law into disrepute.
Let me take a step back. One thing that I agree with you on, and it's obviously factually correct, Chris. Zionism and Judaism are two different things. Zionism is a political movement, and Judaism is a religion. One of the things that frustrates me, and should frustrate everybody on all sides, is the conflation of Judaism with Zionism. But basically, if you want what Zionism wants, you can be a Jew, you cannot be a Jew. It doesn't really matter, actually. If you hate Jews, then you're an anti-Semite. But actually, disagreeing with the political position that Benjamin Netanyahu takes doesn't make you racist against Jews. And I think there's a mix-up which goes on all the time. And I agree with you on that.
It's a trick, Lembit. And you only have to Google Shlomo Aloni, a former Israeli minister who made this remark over 20 years ago now. I mean, it's available on Google. And she said the use of anti-Semitism and Holocaust denial by the Israeli state is a trick. These were her words. It's a trick that we always use. And I think in the past, like for example, under the Corbyn era, the Corbyn project, people did fall for that and gave ground. I mean, including Jeremy, and to myself to some extent, I did too. But I've learnt my lesson now, and you cannot reason with Zionists. You have to confront them and defeat them and completely crush their repugnant ideology. That is absolutely essential, I think, for humanity to do that. And anybody who tries to argue that is wrong, I mean, it just has to look at the slaughter, the wanton slaughter that is being perpetrated by the Israeli colony on the Zionist colony on the Palestinian people, on children as well, women and children in Gaza. It's a crime against humanity of a proportion, the worst crime certainly this century, probably on a par with anything we've ever seen in history, actually.
The second question that I've got is this point that Joe made about the 7th of October. A lot of people simply say that it wasn't justifiable, whatever Hamas's complaints about Israel, to slaughter, I don't know, 1,200 people, something like that, who are really not very political. My experience, Chris, and it must be yours too, is that most people aren't very political anyway.
I agree.
And they were kind of punished, and it wasn't really their fault. And so
I take that point, Lembit, but let's actually unpack what happened on October the 7th, because most of the fatalities, or the responsibility for that, lie at the door of the Israeli occupation forces. The resistance fighters didn't have the firepower to actually inflict the damage on the buildings, for example. And there's been eyewitnesses' accounts as well, where they've said that Israeli tanks fired shells into their building. Many of those people were killed. Some people survived, and they were able to explain what happened. Many of the people that were being taken hostage were shot at. Missiles are fired at them from Israeli military helicopters. The resistance fighters didn't set out on October the 7th to kill anybody. Their intention was to take captives in order, as a bargaining counter, to get their people released from the Israeli dungeons. Israelis haven't got these people in these administrative detention, in these appalling circumstances that they keep them in. Had indeed they not actually made the land grab in 1967 and have continued, even under international law now, still to this very day illegally occupying large parts of Palestine, beyond the 1948 borders, then this wouldn't have happened. I mean, even Hamas have said that they will never recognize Israel, but they would accept the 1960 situation where we can go back to the pre-1967 borders.
Yeah, I don't know what to say to that. I mean, I like the way you call Hamas, which is obviously a terrorist organization, you call them resistance fighters.
It's very obvious. Why is it obvious? Just because they've been designated by politicians in Britain? What's obvious?
Because they commit acts of terror, and when someone commits acts of terror, they are a terrorist organization. Well, your conspiracy theory that it was all the Israelis, I think you need to make your mind up. I mean,
where have they committed acts of terror, though? Whereabouts?
On October the 7th, 1,000 innocent people were murdered by Hamas, resistance fighters, as you call them.
No, that's absolutely not the case. And indeed, this has even been acknowledged now on Israeli media. Just check it out. They invoked the Hannibal Directive, if you're familiar with the Hannibal Directive, whereby
Hamas didn't do anything.
I'm not saying they didn't do anything. Some people were killed by Hamas. I'm not saying they didn't do that. But the Hannibal Directive was invoked, and that's a directive. I mean, look it up. I mean, I'm not just making this up. Where if an Israeli soldier or in this case a civilian is going to be taken hostage, they will invoke maximum force, even if that means killing the soldier or killing the civilians in this case, in order to avoid the prisoner exchange. Because there was a case some years ago where one Israeli soldier was exchanged for several hundred Palestinian prisoners, and they wanted to avoid that. So this controversial Hannibal Directive, it's there, it's on the record, and it's very clear that is what happened. There's a lot of atrocity propaganda that's been peddled by the mainstream media and by the political class. Happened on October the 7th. There was the 40 beheaded babies, which has been proved complete nonsense. There was the claims about putting babies in ovens, complete rubbish. This is all designed to demonize the resistance factions in order to justify a genocide. I mean, how many people they killed?
When you just deny everything, it becomes very difficult to argue anything, doesn't it? Because you're just saying that none of it ever happened. You just sound like...
No, of course, I'll tell you it ever happened. Of course it happened. And some people were killed by Hamas. There's no doubt about that. Indeed, some civilians were killed by Hamas, I'm sure, in the crossfire that ensued with the Israeli. Yes, with Israel, because they exchanged fire with the Israeli. When the Israeli forces were mobilized, clearly there was an exchange of fire. But you can't argue with the facts. Even the Israeli media has acknowledged that most of the people that were killed by the Israeli military. I mean, it's just impossible. The resistance fighters didn't have the firepower to inflict the damage on the vehicles, on the buildings that is there for all to see. We just need to just scrutinize the facts, and you'll come to the inescapable conclusion that the myths that are being peddled by the corporate media and the political class are just they are a myth, they're a complete lie. In order to run cover for the Zionist entity, and that's because the vast majority of the political class, certainly in senior levels, are owned by the Israeli regime, owned by Zionists, because they're funded by them. Just look at who donates to the Labour Party, who donates to these senior politicians. Puppets for.
Is it fair to say, Chris, that you were too left for the Labour Party?
No, I think certainly too left for the Labour Party in today's Labour Party, because it's not really the Labour Party that I joined in 1976 at all. It's very much a war machine now. It's a party which is no real difference between the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, and Reform, frankly, in this country. They're all signed up to the disastrous neoliberal economic agenda, and they're all signed up to the war machine, and basically they're all in thrall to the Zionist entity.
In free speech terms, it's really important that we put all the positions in correctly.
Yeah, 100% agree, yeah.
Chris, can we maybe do that? We can do a whole show on this.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. We I'll dig out the Israeli, the coverage of it, and be able to disabuse Joe of her view about...
please do.
We're getting into a fascinating, energetic debate, which everybody needs to hear, because everyone needs to have their point of view on it.